My mum was a district midwife in Coatbridge, who my dad described as the world's first feminist. He was actually known as May Brady's husband, which kind of gives you a sense of how powerful she was in the community. But in the 60s and 70s, 68 weeks after I was born on March 10th, 1964, she was out of the door. She was a vocational nurse, and she lived and breathed the profession. And I remember being cared up to until about 6 p.m, 7 p.m, sometimes longer, by the usual mix, a mix that many of you in this room will know, of grands, of aunties, but also in a hard-working family in the mid-60s, a dedicated nana, or nanny, I suppose you would say. We called her Nana. A lady that lived next door to us in Langloan, and she fed us fried beans and sausage. That was her favourite. It was my favourite meal, which explains the self-like before you. So if I shut my eyes and think of my mother in her prime, she's in a blue uniform, she's coming back in the dark, she's bearing a large bar of Fry's chocolate cream, which also explains, as you might know. So my own life of balancing children and work would start from 1989 onwards with my first daughter, Grace. And again, my then wife, Joan McAlpin, and I had a similar mad mix. Again, you'll know this mix. There was lots of money coming in the go-go 80s, for reasons I can occlude. But we started off by having a nanny to come in, a day nanny to come in, just to look after the kids while we were around being 80s. And then when that stopped and we couldn't afford it, it was a mixture of the local state nursery, grands who were fit and able, but increasingly didn't become so fit and able. And then later on in years, the thing called the Highland Primary After School Club, where you would turn up one day to a child that had gone feral with face paint or was absorbed in a video game, who one day ignored you completely and one day clung tight to you like a limpet as soon as you came in the door. But even then, this is like the late 80s, early 90s, working pattern was odd, and I think that's one of the things when you dwell on this personally and you think about working patterns, you think about the big policy statements, you actually think about the patchwork and the varied landscape of working and caring lives. It's worth attending to the detail. My then partner, Joan, was in a series of journalist jobs on a rising career path. And Joan became the first female editor of a newspaper ever, historically, in Scotland. But each rise in that career path demanded more time from her in the work culture. Journalism, a notoriously presenteeist work culture. And I was a musician, actually, strictly speaking, a commercial traveller, who was away recording or playing for weeks and then back, being at home writing or thinking or being with my child for weeks. And for me, when things became less music career intensive, I became more freelance, and that became a necessity, but also became a capacity to respond to children falling off high exercise bars with giant duck blue eggs bruises on their forehead, that size. But the freelance nature of my sort of post-music career life allowed me to respond. And again, that's not 2016, that's 1994, 95, 96. And then finally, my brother now has a 3-year-old daughter. Mine are 18 and 26, and he's a 3-year-old daughter, his first, called Eva Rose, and he's definitely one of those, brilliant phrase in your report, called the sandwich generation. The generation who has responsibilities to their children, but also to their parents, and that's something that me and my two brothers are doing in response to my now 82-year-old mum, but we're also uncles looking after Eva Rose as well. And she's just fiercely opposed to seeing the inside of anybody else's home. This is the home that she's living in, no other home. So we are properly dragooned and utilised as the village and the family that it takes to care. So as I say, you've all got your own stories, but the one thing I think this implies is that of all the policy issues that could kind of come upon you as a citizen of Scotland, this is the one that all of us have a stake in, whether we are the birth parents of children or whether we're involved in being a village to raise a child. We all have a stake in it, and so we should be able to build quite a strong consensus about designing the best possible system and the culture, and to get this right, to get the relationship between work and family life and children right. We should be able to do this. But there was a very useful piece of literature that I prepared myself with that came from the site, the Family Friendly Working Scotland site itself, and it was your 2015 Modern Families Index. If you haven't read it, I really would urge you to read it. It's a very interesting document. And I'm struck, being a pesty intellectual, by what it does cover and what it doesn't talk much about, and also by the short to medium term perspectives that it looks at and the longer term perspectives that it isn't looking at. And the introduction has a fantastic line from Sarah, which I must identify, and it's the germane question. Are we concerned with creating family-friendly economies or economy-friendly families? I'll say that again. Are we concerned with creating family-friendly economies or economy-friendly families? And I think that is the moot point. And Sarah goes on to say in her piece that it has to be a blend of both, and I'm sure in a room of employers you would agree with that. But I think it's a provocative phrase. And even to take one end of it, the economy-friendly family, well, it depends on the economy that you're talking about. What kind of economy you're talking about. So one of the things I think we get reasonably right in Scotland, not perfect, but we're thinking about it seriously and collectively, is we know the insight, and maybe we know this insight from Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations on one side, theory and moral sentiments on the other, that markets, enterprise and business activity actively benefits from regulation and support that is socially and humanely oriented. Some of you may know this name, but the late and much lamented feminist economist Ailsa Mackay, she is credited in pointing out to Alex Salmond, let us say one of the more clubbable men in Scotland, how an extensive childcare system could help women become more economically active in the labour market and actually potentially pay for itself in increased income tax revenues. So that's an example, along with a commitment to the living wage in public sectors, to working in partnership with trade unions, the Fair Wage Commission as another example. We should be able to assume a Scottish consensus about work and family life that makes significant progress possible. Now let me test that with a big idea that came out about 3 weeks ago. I'm on the board of something called Commonweal. Has anybody heard of Commonweal? One or two of you. It's a Scottish think and do tank that arose in the context of the independence referendum, trying to kind of bring some intellectual vitality to the discussion. They launched a paper a few weeks ago called An Equal Start, a Plan for Equality in Early Learning and Care in Scotland. And it seemed, sorry I keep quoting you, Susan, but it's good stuff. There's a conclusion in the report which says, okay, good, take the kudos. The focus still tends to be on what individuals themselves can do, rather than how wider cultural and structural changes might support them better. So the focus is more on the individual coping than on the structures supporting. Now, structurally, this Commonweal report has gone for it. Okay, they're arguing for a full nationalised, full-day free service, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m, with a fully professionalised and standardised workforce across the country, serving the demography and geography of the whole place. A public service similar in status and permanency to primary school education, and individuals would turn to it in the same ways they do state schooling. Now, they've completely gone with it. But let me be honest, does that fit with either my own childhood history that I've been telling you about, my own parenting experience of 15, 20 years ago, even never mind my brothers right now? I mean, I certainly think an equal start supported by childcare should be the desired outcome. I mean, the report I keep citing shows strong evidence about how people are still willing to pay for private provision that has the flexibility and the duration that they need, but how much the cost of that affects people's livelihoods. There's one relative of mine saying, you're working to pay to be away from your wane. What's the point in that? But I wonder whether, so take the Commonweal investment as the radical notion. I wonder whether it should still be responsive to this variable landscape of care that we tend to seek out. I mean, the one story I'm thinking about is the granny or the relative or the friend who could feel shut out of their afternoons with the children in their lives by a childcare system that was too utilitarian, that was all about, improving the human capital of a child through thoroughly rigorous and professionalised childcare. And it almost became a kind of an expectation, nearly a legal expectation in the way that we have legal expectations for kids to go to school. That, to me, would seem to be a loss in the way that we, sometimes creatively, sometimes chaotically, piece together, built out of human relations as much as out of funding or obligations, the way that we look after our children. It takes a village, as the presidential candidate Clinton once wrote in a book about 15, 20 years ago. Now, there's another item in your Modern Families Index that I thought was very striking for me. It's one of the poll findings in the report, and it's based on a very simple but very profound question. Now, I've not sorted out my graphics here at all, but I will use my Vibelfetzer. Now, can you all see that pie chart? There's a very, very large red part. Fix it in your brain. He's being very pedagogical. Puts it down. Okay. That is a chart where the question is, beautiful and profound question, what is your highest priority? Now, the percentages are, this is a real envelope opening moment. At 4% are friends and community as one of the highest priorities. At 5% is work. Another 5% is hobbies and outside interests. At 20% is the relationship with your partner. And number one highest priority compared to 5% for work is 66% my family. Now, that's the most revolutionary graphic I have seen in many a year. And I think one of the implications of it, if I'm in a room of constructive people from private and public sectors, and you're being rightly commended within the operations of your own enterprises and organisations for being sympathetic and responsive to the need for family-friendly economic relations, the bigger perspective is, and I'm not the only person to say this, is that these economic relations are about to radically change. Work is about to experience one of its biggest crises ever. George Osborne is expected to announce in the budget next week that we will have driverless lorries on the streets of the UK. There's a report from Bank of America that says that half of all existing manufacturing jobs will be automated in a generation, saving $9 trillion in labour costs. Obvious question, who will then buy the widgets? There's a great article in The Guardian, I think, today or yesterday, by Tom Watson, Deputy Leader of the UK Labour Party. And I'll just quote it because he says it better than I could. We already have an hourglass economy, with plenty of room at the top for those with existing wealth and access to capital, and a wide, flat base of lower-paid jobs that cannot be automated. But there is a hollowing out of the middle. The jobs in retail or high street banking, for example, or middle management or bureaucracy, public and private. We are becoming a country of affluent leaders and struggling workers with less space in the middle and fewer chances for progression. He continues, new technology will exacerbate this trend. Unlike previous waves of industrial process, it's not just working class jobs, primarily done with the hands, that automation threatens. Automated systems are diagnosing diseases, writing annual reports, researching criminal cases in court, designing software and pouring our coffee. Another book I would recommend to you that I reviewed for The New Scientist is by Richard and Daniel Susskind. Richard Susskind is a famous son of Glasgow and an expert on law and technology. An amazing book called The Future of the Professions, Richard and Daniel Susskind. And they argue it's jobs in medicine, law, accountancy and engineering that will bear a lot of the initial impact of the rise of automation. The example that Watson gives is, why would you need a GP when a robot can read our complex physical signs and prescribe, manufacture and distribute the exact blend of medication we need based on our life signs and our genome? That situation is really not far away, and you think that your sons and daughters or friends who have got doctors' professions are protected from the future. They are not. Now, we know this is coming, and I could cite you 5 or 6 other reports, certainly from the organisation I'm working for at the moment. Nesta is very, very clear about up to 40% of existing jobs by 2040 will be gone, automated, both hand and heart, not so much heart, hand and head. Heart is interesting, that's maybe unautomatable when we come to that. So we know this is coming, we know there's going to be a reduced quanta of wage labouring jobs as a result of these innovations. So we need to factor this into any of these big discussions that we have about the relationships between family, children and our working lives. And it's hard to see the response being anything other than structural and cultural. You can do so much at the level of the enterprise and organisation, but you need a change in culture and you need a change in structures within which you can, those changes that you make at the level of your enterprise have a fair wind. And these new regulations, laws and structures are currently being tested out. Sweden at the moment is experimenting with a 6-hour day. Finland and Holland are seriously trying out schemes for basic citizens' income. You might have heard of shorter working week, obviously, but citizens' income is a very hot idea at the moment. One of the constituents who think it's a really hot idea are the tech moguls that are making a fortune because they fear the pitchforks are coming at them in various parts of middle America. But both, just to take these policies as an example, shorter working weeks, shorter working days, and citizens' income, both of them are looking at this $9 trillion, that's in manufacturing, add to that what the white-collar replacement of labour is going to be. And they are asking a question that's been asked for about 10 years about the 1%. Why should all this profit go to corporate coffers? Shouldn't some of that be returned to put demand into the economy? That's one of the arguments for basic income, is that it raises the basic level of existence such that employers are sort of compelled to pay more. That's one of the redistributive arguments for it. But it also might, one of the other aspects of that might be that in terms of reducing working hours, that if we have a reduced quanta of effective economic jobs, that we spread them more widely through the population. And one of the ways to do that is to look at a systematic reduction in working hours. But let me go back to that pie chart above, which again, your highest priority is 66% family and 5% work. There's another statistic that backs this up, which you quoted earlier on, Sarah, which is nearly a third of parents said they would like to use less childcare and spend more time with their children. I mean, there's other startling stats in this report. For example, 41% of women and 9.2% of men reduced their working hours to care for children under the age of 8. So 41.7% of women are prepared to do this, 9.2% of men. That's almost like a completely different conference, to be honest. But stay with that 95% of the pie chart that doesn't put work as a priority. Now, this may say something about the nature of work and jobs, which may be your challenge, and which I know a lot of people are thinking about. Fair work is a concept that's very much worth addressing. But it seems to me that there is an enormous constituency, if you look at that pie chart and has any saliency, who would be up for a radically different balance between their working lives and their caring and their loving lives. 95% is an enormous range of interests who do not see work as in any way remotely the priority in life. Now, Rahm Emanuel once said, Obama's advisor, never let a good crisis go to waste. And the crisis of work under automation, and not just automation, but emerging economies with competitive labour rates, an ageing population, the crisis of work has multiple sources. But this is going to demand a lot from all of us, citizens, workers, companies, politicians, academics, and it's probably much bigger thinking and acting than we can currently conceive. But here's the challenge. If we arrange our laws and institutions and then the organisations within those regulations properly, it may be the case that we increasingly have the time to spend with our children, partners and families and communities and pastimes and friends that these reports show that we crave. Now, before the cliches come, and I can almost feel them as a mental wave, I don't know whether I'd want to see more of him indoors or her indoors, to be perfectly honest. The challenge is that if the world of work is contracting and transforming and morphing as it is, we may have to think about a life where the conversation, the emotional response, the act of care becomes the mainstream activity of our lives. Are you ready for that, Scotland? It's a good challenge. So never mind the power of the 1%, think about the desires for a rich and meaningful life of the 95%. And that's a future to conjure with. And it doesn't mitigate in any way the fabulous work that's been shown today and that you've been properly awarded for. But we all have to think strategically about the future of the world of work, and there are big changes coming. And I think we can respond to them from deep emotional wells of what it is that we regard as important. It's also within this care sector. It's not as if there isn't business and enterprise to be had, when care and loving and community and relations become the centre of a society rather than the margin of a society. But we maybe need to test those out in practice rather than predict them in advance. I hope that's been interesting, stimulating and useful. Please talk to me anytime, in life or online. Thank you very much.